What's up, everybody? It's Eric from Trimmed and Burning, and today we're going to be talking about the Bible in a nutshell and covering the history books. So last time we covered the Torah, which are the first 5 books of the Bible, and what we're doing here in Bible in a nutshell is trying to explain the Bible to you as if it were a movie, so you can understand how everything started and where everything's going. We're actually in that movie, you're going to find out, and that's why it's important to understand the Bible all the way from the Old Testament through to the New Testament, and it will explain everything that's going on today in our lives and in our society. So we're going to pick up where we left off last. Moses had died, and now it's being passed on to Joshua. God is passing the torch to Joshua with his power, and he's going to have Joshua lead them into the promised land. The old generation had died out in the wilderness, and they're heading into the promised land now, and God has Joshua split the Jordan River, just like Moses had split the Red Sea. But we all know it was God's power that was doing all this. So it showed Israel that Joshua was going to be their new Moses, their new leader, and he was ordained by God to lead them into the promised land. So they go across the Jordan River, they enter the promised land, and God had told them to get rid of the Canaanites. The promised land is called Canaan, and the people that lived there were called Canaanites. And God said, wipe them out. This is going to be the land of Israel, the nation of Israel. They're the nation now. They went in as a family of Israel. Now they're the nation of Israel with God's law. And this is their land that was promised to them. All the other land is the 70 nations, the 70 Gentile nations. But this nation of Israel is going to have the promised land, and they're supposed to eliminate all their enemies, the Canaanites. But they do not. They eliminate some of them and take over the land, but they allow some of them to live there, and they even make them into slaves, which was not what God intended. So it gets bad to where they start to live like the Canaanites, they start to live like the other 70 nations, and they start following idolatrous ways and worshiping the other gods and following their culture, all their sinful ways. And Israel was supposed to stand apart. They had God's law now. They're supposed to follow his word and look different than the other 70 nations. But we find out Israel is just as sinful as every other nation. The only difference is that God has called them to be his chosen people, to set them apart and to have the Messiah, Jesus Christ, born through this bloodline. That's what the whole Old Testament's doing. It's pointing to Jesus Christ and why he is our Messiah and how he was always prophesied, always pointed to here in these books. So they leave these Canaanites around, and this leads us into the book of Judges in the history books. And Judges is about how they would start to oppress the people, Philistines, the Moabites, these other Canaanites that they didn't wipe out. They would eventually oppress, God would allow them to oppress Israel because of their complaining and because of because of their disobedience to God, their idolatry, and following the other 70 nations more than God's law. Eventually they would repent, and God would raise up a judge. Well, this judge would rise up as a leader with God's power and deliver them from their oppressors, the Canaanites, and Israel would be saved by God's power until they'd slip right back into pride and idolatry again, and then they would follow and spiral back into this where they'd be oppressed by the Canaanites again, and God would raise up another judge. But we learned that even these judges were sinful people. Although they allowed God's power to work through them, they themselves were sinful. Even Samson, one of the most popular judges, was sinful with women, allowing women to take him away from his vows, then following God and things like that. So we see that happen, and things start to get even worse in the time of the judges. It was a lawless time in the land of Israel. They weren't following God. They were living like the world, like the other nations, like the Gentiles were. And they had asked Samuel to give them a king. They were asking God basically to give them a king. And God, Yahweh himself, was supposed to be king. Just like Jesus Christ is king. He is God and he is king. He's supposed to be the king of Israel. But instead, they wanted a human king. So God allows him to do this. Samuel's sad about it, but God has him do this, and he anoints Saul. Saul is the first king of Israel, human king. So now there's a monarchy, there's a leadership, and there's a king here. But it's a man, it's Saul. We find out that he is sinful, he's fallible, and God ends up having him die and his son Jonathan, who was friends with David. We're going to learn about David, who was a shepherd boy that God raises up to be a king. Now it's interesting here because Saul was from the line of Benjamin, and Benjamin was one of the 12 tribes, but David is from Judah, and David is anointed the second king. He comes from the line of Judah, which back in Genesis was prophesied that the Messiah would come from this line. So now the line of Judah has the kingdom. They are the king now. David is the king, the line of Judah here, and he has promised, the Davidic covenant it's called, that the Messiah will come from his bloodline, and he will remain on the throne forever and ever, his family, which is a reference to Jesus Christ, that Jesus Christ is going to come and reign forever as king of Israel and king of creation, because he is God, he is Lord of all. But we learned that David was still sinful. Even though he was one of the best kings of Israel, he was still sinful. He had Uriah killed. He stole his wife, did these sinful things. And because of that, you can see there's punishment throughout his life. His life ends up becoming miserable. There's turmoil within his family. But he ultimately dies, and the rule goes along to Solomon. Solomon becomes king now. And Solomon's actually the one that builds the temple to God. It had been a tabernacle, a temporary place, and now it's going to be a permanent place, the temple. This is where the first temple is built. You'll hear about the temples of Israel. This is the first one. David wanted to build it, but God said, no, your son Solomon is going to build it. And Solomon was also the wisest man who ever lived, other than Jesus Christ, by the way. We learned that he asked God for wisdom when he was allowed to ask for anything. So he was very successful, although he was also very sinful, had many wives and concubines and things like that. But he was a very wise man, and overall he was a great and successful leader, with God's help, of course. But after he dies, the family gets what's coming to him. There's a divided kingdom. Jeroboam and Rehoboam, Solomon's two sons, go to war, and there's a civil war, and they split into the north and the south. The north is the kingdom of Israel, and the south is the kingdom of Judah. And Judah is where Jerusalem's going to be. This is the southern kingdom. This is the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, which were the lines of the kings. And the other 10 tribes are up north. And we learned that things got very sinful, and God allowed Assyria to come in and oppress the people and actually take away the 10 tribes, the northern kingdom. The south was saved. The kingdom of Judah was saved because they trusted in the Lord, but the north was taken away. And these are the 10 lost tribes that a lot of people refer to. These tribes have never yet come back, although the people are trying to get them back to Israel today to bring the end times prophecy that they will all return. But the 10 tribes were taken away by Assyria here. This was in 722 BC. Now fast forward to around 606 BC, and the southern kingdom is no better when Babylon comes in and takes them away. And they're taken away to Babylon, just like was prophesied by Jeremiah with the power of God. And Jeremiah said that they'd be there for 70 years oppressed, but then they'd return. And that's exactly what happens, which is pretty neat. So Cyrus is the king of Persia, the leader of Persia, the prince of Persia. And Cyrus comes and conquers Babylon. So Persia takes over. And he was prophesied in the Bible by name. Cyrus by name is in there. And it said that God would send him to free the Israelites and send them back to their land, which he does. So Cyrus sends them back, he gives them money, and he allows the Jews to go back. Ezra is able to restore the law of the Lord with his power, and Nehemiah comes back and builds Jerusalem, and the Jews are back in their land, and they actually build the second temple. This is where the second temple comes in. The second temple is built here, which we will find out that later will be destroyed in the New Testament, or after the New Testament, I should say, in those times, in the future times. But this is the second temple that was built during this time after the return of Babylon. And now they're waiting on the third temple. This is where all this stuff comes from. But it was the temple of God that had been rebuilt. The people had been restored just like God had prophesied, because he's outside of time and he knew this would happen, and he told them through Jeremiah that it would last 70 years, which it does, and they come back. Now this leads up to around 430 or 400 BC or so, about 400 years before the New Testament picks up with Jesus Christ and everything that goes on there. So this is called the intertestamental period. After the Old Testament, we don't really have much written until the New Testament, and the intertestamental period follows the Old Testament. And here's where history will show us that the Greeks came in and they overthrew the Persians, and then after the Greeks, the Romans came in. And that's why in the New Testament it's set up that the Romans are in power. Okay, but that's what goes on intertestamentally. History shows us this. And see, the Bible runs historically right in through up to our current time period. So you can see the Bible is historically accurate and is exactly what the Bible said happened, and God fulfilled his prophecies. And there's going to be more prophecies to be fulfilled. And we're going to learn more about next time in the next episode about the New Testament and what continued to happen. We're going to continue to learn about the Bible in a nutshell. But if you like this video, please click like, click subscribe, and go ahead and share this video. We thank you again for watching this. Continue to teach people about the Bible, and continue to learn about the Bible and grow in your faith. But until next time, my name is Eric, and keep your lamps trimmed and burning.
Almost over, almost over, almost over.